Hey, good evening, folks. If it's evening for you and you're watching this live, or good day, wherever you happen to be otherwise. Tonight, we're going to talk about peak performance, biohacking peak performance a little bit, and turn off the show title. Let me know if you can hear me okay, because I always seem to have issues with audio. I think it's working. I can see it moving on the screen, which I think means I have good audio. So let me know if it's coming through. But welcome to Neurofeedback and Chill, which is our weekly-ish live stream talking about different neurofeedback topics and brain-based biohacking topics. And tonight I'm talking about peak performance. And this gets into several of the biohacks that we've talked about with regards to different topics, different types of things we can do, and different sort of systems within the brain that might be worth thinking about. But I wanted to approach it a little bit differently tonight and talk about, what is that peak performance thing? Hey, Radar Ashwood, welcome. I see folks rolling in. Thanks, guys. Give me an audio check if you could before I launch in deeply. And I'll take off my headset as well and start sticking some wires on. But we're going to talk about peak performance today. And the idea is to maybe rehash a few things that we talked about before. I tend to have the same themes of understanding your brain and knowing how to take control over it. But in this instance, I wanted to really draw our attention to a narrower perspective, this idea of peak performance, and talk about what that might be, what that is. So let me set up a neurofeedback protocol. Go over here, move my head. And I think I'm going to do a 2-channel tonight. That's assuming my amplifier has 2 working channels. I have a very old amplifier from the office that I'm working with, so it may only have 1 working channel. We'll see. Let me change the layout to an 8 trace so I can do a 2-channel. I'll explain in a second why I'm planning on doing a 2-channel. Okay, we'll do C3A1 and C4A2. C4 minus A2. There we go. So these are 2 locations in the head. And the left side will run 14.5 tonight maybe. And 17.5. So I'm going to reward a beta frequency on that side. And then on the right side, a low beta or an SMR. Let's do 11.75 to 14.75. And 2234 on the right, 24 to 36 on the left, 4 to 7 on both. And I'm going to run this for only maybe 15 minutes because it's kind of a strong one. There we go. Okay. So I'll explain more about that once it's up on the screen. So what is everyone up to tonight as I set myself up for some neurofeedback? What is it you guys are doing? What are your new habits for the year? What kinds of things are you trying? What are your new biohacks? Tell me all about them. For those of you new to what we're doing tonight, I'm setting myself up with some neurofeedback. There's an amplifier I have here, which essentially is going to pick up electricity from my head called EEG. This is EEG neurofeedback we're starting off with. And I'm doing a complicated setup, a little bit, a 2-channel protocol, because I want to train the left side, which is involved with stabilizing executive function, and the right side, which is involved with supervising executive function at the same time. And do a contingent training, which will reinforce the communication between those locations. So neurofeedback is a tiny bit messy and has lots of small wires. So here I've got a bunch of electrodes that I'll be using. And I need 3 ear clips. I only have 2 ears. You're not counting wrong. But there'll be 2 ear clips on one side. So what I'll do is just go by color of wire. I'm not going to bother untangling them all. So if you notice, my ear clips are black and blue. And one trick when you're setting up 2 channels of data is one of the wires has to be a ground wire. And it doesn't really matter where on the head you put a ground. But if you're going to put 2 wires on one ear, and one of them is going to be the ground, then you should match the wire color. So I'm going to put 2 black wires in my left ear. Hey, Fred Teo. Thanks for showing up. How are you tonight? Okay, so I have some paste. This is electrolyte paste. And I'm just going to put some paste on the wire surfaces and hang 2 clips off my left ear. So just did that with the wire stuff, and then there we go. So tell me in the comments or the chat, what is it you are working on for the year? What is the first habit, the first biohack? What is the new thing you're going to try? What is the thing you're going to double down on? What is the thing you've already started to try and are having trouble with? Hey, Murray. Longtime lurker with regards to setting your circadian rhythm with light. Does it matter if one is exposed to light or light with some amount of blue before your retinas see the sky? It does not matter. No. In fact, morning blue light is fine. Morning light is pretty good. You can get away with in training it before or after. But if you miss the morning light, you don't get the circadian entrainment effect for light. It's really only useful in the morning. So the rule of thumb is to get, my rule of thumb is to get a little bit of light, even ambient light, within 1 hour after sunrise or about 45 minutes before the color change is sort of there in the air. So what I just did is hang another wire off my head. These are now my ground wires and my actives, or rather my references. So I'm taking my Whiz amp. I'm going to plug 2 black wires into the left ear reference, which is a black socket, and the ground, which is a black wire. And my right ear is the reference for the second whole channel, which is the blue socket. Sorry, the white socket. And then I have 2 more wires to put on my actual head. And we're going to use a wiring setup kind of like this. So you can see that I'm going to use the yellow wire on my C3, which is left side. Fred's got a goal. This year's goal is the Twin Cities Marathon. Hey, that's pretty cool. My little sister runs marathons, but I'm not built to run marathons. I'm built to like lift heavy rocks and walk up mountains. I have short little stubby Scottish legs. So running was never super fun for me. Let me get these wires going. So what I'm doing tonight, guys, is a C3 beta and a C4 SMR in a contingent dual. And what that does, let's see if I can do this at the same time. Let's see how fancy I can be. That one's okay. That one is, do one at a time, I think. Yeah, it's fine. And I want these things to be somewhat symmetrical. Whenever you're doing a 2-channel, symmetry becomes a little more important than precision by the bone landmarks. Okay, how we doing? This camera is not lined up super well for me. Left one, I think it wants to move down a little bit. So for those of you who train with me, now you understand that yes, I too have trouble sometimes finding locations. Let me see, are these the same height? That's lower. I'm going to move this one lower a little bit too. There we go. That's fine now. I have some paper here to wipe my hands off. So, Fred, that's a great goal. When is the Twin Cities Marathon? I think I would need like a year or 2 or 3 to train. You know, those 30 days or whatever couch to marathon kind of runs. I would need years to get in shape for a marathon. Okay, the amp is jumping around a little bit. I'm not sure why. I'm going to reset it. Okay, there we go. Let's see what kind of signals we have. So Murray, just more back on that light thought. In the morning, within 45 minutes before sunrise to about an hour after sunrise, I think is your window. And then in the evening, I don't think it matters. I don't think worrying about evening light or restricting evening light matters really much at all. And by the same token, getting up super early, like 3 in the morning, and getting some artificial light and then seeing the sun, 3-4 hours later, I think is going to give you some of the same entrainment as just getting up and rolling out into the sun. Okay, let me see if I can get a good signal. The amplifier lights are jumping around, which I think means my impedances are a little bit high. I didn't prep my skin at all. October, Fred? Okay, so you got plenty of time. You can progressively train up to that time. No worries there then. It's great. Fred, are you already doing marathons? Is the new thing? Let me get the software running here, guys. Then I'll explain what I'm doing technically. All right. Oh, I didn't think about game. I didn't install any new games yet. I have to do that for you guys soon. All right. I think I'm going to do, let's do Island or Highway. It's been a minute since we've done Island or Highway, which are the same game basically. Which is more fun. They're really not any different. But let's use Island. There we go. All right, so waiting for the amplifier to wake up. Channel 1 looks a little iffy. Okay, so actually I have channel 1 working fine. Channel 2 is not reading. As you guys can see, that little vertical line nonsense, that's a sign my channel's not reading properly. Let's figure out why. So the green wire, unplug it and plug it back into the amp. Okay, now my channel 2 is reading, so the wire was just loose. Let me stop moving around, let these channels settle down, maybe widen them out a little bit. There we go. So they're sensitive to movement, especially the one on the left, apparently. Interesting. I wonder why. It's super sensitive to movement. Let's see. That's the yellow, which is my left. Yeah. Let's see. Oh, yeah. There's not enough paste on that. So you can see how it keeps coming and going in terms of how stable it is. That's probably a sign the paste was too loose. And on my bald head, it was warming up and getting loose right away. So let me actually put that back on. And I think it goes about there. Yep, that's fine. So Murray has some unrelated questions. We love unrelated questions. Lay them on me. Any thoughts on derealization, depersonalization? Yeah, DPTR is hard stuff. My short answer is DPDR is not something that responds especially well to most of my primary hacks, which are, neurofeedback and things. I think that DPDR, I think it responds a little bit to irritating the serotonergic system with microdosing. So you can do things like subthreshold St. John's wort and not get exacerbation of the DPDR, and sometimes create a little more sensitization of that system. That's my theory on that. I don't think there's reliable ways to treat it, although I would go look at the Reddit's forums on that particular topic, because there are people using novel compounds. I see it happen a fair amount to people who experiment with their brains, and I especially see it when people combine multiple things that affect serotonin, like a serotonin drug mixed with a medication or mixed with an herb like lemongrass or ashwagandha or large doses of St. John's wort or cannabis or LSD or, SSRIs. And the combination can really, really screw with people's brains aggressively and leave them with that DPDR phenomena. And I don't think it's a super, super changeable thing for many people. I also think that it might not be a complete phenomena for most people, where it seems to come and go or have moments where it's not quite as intense. So I would find whatever actually modifies that experience. And I've seen that people have modified it by, finding like a way sub-threshold dose of St. John's wort. The literature, I think, uses 900 milligrams a day. And I've seen people use a third of that or less to create not much of a serotonin supplement response with St. John's wort. One person I know has done it with 5-HT, which is the precursor to 5-HTP, which is serotonin. Other way around. 5-HTP becomes 5-HT. That's how I might approach it, but I also think it can be kind of complex. So if I was suffering from it really acutely, I might also get a methylation analysis and have someone look at all the different B vitamins and try to figure out if there's something there that might lubricate a change in some of those tissues, because the methylation stuff seems to be related to for many people. All right, let me get my game going now that I have clean signals. A lot of signals in the screen. If you guys have watched these live streams recently, I've been running one channel, which is fewer traces in the screen. This is an 8-trace layout. All kinds of things happening. So those top 2 squiggles are my raw signals. Here, let me bring them up for a second. There's that top one, then the second one, left and right of my head. Then we have 3 bands, which are the left side training bands, and then 3 bands, which are the right side training bands. And for all of them, we have my mouse back here. For all of them, under where my head is, let me move it over. We have this column, which is in the 50s in the top 2. That's the amplitude, the microvolts. So I'm filtering out different frequencies or bands out of the raw EEG. And you can see in that this next band here, which has a 29 microvolt, it's a 4 to 7 hertz. You can see a little pink box there next to my head. And so 4 to 7 hertz, I'm making 33 microvolts, and that's theta. I'm also making theta down here for the other side of my head, 22 microvolts. So interesting, the theta is different on the 2 sides. Cool. Well, generally you want to make less theta for most neurofeedback protocols, not all. There are things called alpha theta where you want to make more. But in this case, standard protocol where you do beta training, you want to actually make less theta. And so I've set a threshold, which is the THR there. And whenever the number is below the threshold, it'll allow the game to run. And the opposite is true for the bands marked with the RWRD, which are my beta band on the left and my low beta band or SMR on the right. So let me start this and then answer more questions. So to start it, I think I need to scale. No, I don't actually. I'm just going to hit F5 to begin. There we go. Oh, I had to hit control, not function. There we go. All right, so now basically whenever my brain spends half a second in range with all of those conditions met, all 6 of them, the blue bar at the bottom of the screen will be nice and wide, and the little boxes in the corners of the screen will remain small. And that will let a beep happen. Actually, a little bit of scaling or a little bit of widening out of that left side to avoid clipping out because it's extra sensitive to my movement right now. There we go. All right. Let's talk about questions again. Hey, VJ. How you doing tonight? How far have I seen attention pushed? Aha. And would you be able to summarize attention a bit? Because I noticed there are so many facets to attention, like single-pointed focus, holistic awareness, etc., switching gears. Aha. Okay. So what I would say about focus is you can see what's happening on the screen. I have no left side rewards on the game screen because my left side channel was noisy there as I looked down and moved the wire, apparently. It's recovering now, though. Maybe not. Let's see. Let me tighten it up. Could be that I have a bad channel on this amp. Let me spin a wire or something. There we go. VJ, forms of attention are in terms of neurofeedback, the left side control is C3 for activating executive function, and the right side is for supervising it. And the combination will help you manage the gas versus the brakes. But then you can also think about different aspects of hemispheric attention. So each hemisphere individually, there we go. Each hemisphere individually has an attention system and will combine late, if you will, to create our experience of attention. The way that I think about those resources are bound by something called the attention network that was first, I think, introduced by Michael Posner. And then my advisor, Dr. Aron Zeidel, took the Posner Attention Network task, the ANT, and he made it into the lateralized attention network task. And what the ANT and the LANT do is they flash a line of arrows on the screen, and there's 5 of them, little 5 arrows in a row. And for the ANT, for the ANT, the line of arrows was horizontal. You can see how little points I got here, how few points I got because I had a lot of noise in that period. Signals are pretty good now, though. So Posner's ANT, you would stare at a screen at a fixation point and wait for a line of arrows to flash up on the screen, and your instructions are to click the left or right button based on is the middle arrow of 5 pointing left or pointing right. And it turns out if you see it and you click left, you click right, not that hard. But if the arrows that are the flankers, the 2 on the left and the 2 on the right, are not congruent in the same direction, if they're incongruent flankers, all pointing the opposite direction from the target arrow, it slows you down in responding to the ask about the direction of the arrow. And it also makes you a little bit less accurate. And Posner defined this as executive conflict. And it really involves a bunch of aspects of executive function coming together to select from among competing things you have to focus on, which involves a bunch of phenomena, including the anterior cingulate. And then Dr. Zeidel took the ANT and made it a vertical line of arrows and put one in the left screen and right screen and had you stare at a fixation point in the middle, and then added cueing, so you can flash a little asterisk on the screen before the line of arrows shows up. And so now we have measures of alerting. How different are you from seeing, how much better are you at responding to the line of arrows when you've been cued, when a little asterisk flash up before you see the line of arrows? That's alerting versus not alerting. So the attention aspects, the vigilance aspects on the IVA test that I showed you, that's vigilance. Alerting is catching the new thing, basically. And so we also have orienting, because you can alert somebody to the proper visual field, or you can alert them to the, or not alert them, or you can alert them to the wrong visual field for the subsequent stream, little line of arrows. And what this does is it creates a benefit for spatially orienting yourself and a cost for improperly orienting yourself. So in terms of these very transient management of executive resources, I think about alerting, orienting, and conflict as cognitive control kind of resources that sit on top of the more basic resources at the cortical level. And then you have some mapping, like C4 really is about conflict, or the right supervisor is really about conflict. And the left supervisor, left stabilizer, is more about alerting. And orienting is a combination of visual tissue, parietal and visual occipital, and the frontal tissues. So it's pretty complicated in terms of a cortical distribution. So switching gears, in that instance, look how low my rewards are. This happens with dual protocols anyways, because you have to have so many things contingent. But I think I'm just adding so much noise by talking that I'm interrupting my rewards a lot. So you guys can hear I'm getting a few rewards here and there. Elliot, hey Elliot, I find an aggressive 10-20 abrasive scrub before paste improves impedance by 10 points. Yep. I just got out of the shower and shaved my head, so I know my impedances are low. This is more about movement. I think I'm causing just too much movement. Elliot's befuddled by the ground wire. I mentioned the QIS creates an artificial or virtual. Yeah. It's not very stable though. It's a transient software ground. So like here, I'm adding more movement noise. Tighten the wires up. There we go. So it doesn't work to start without a ground. But if you run a whiz amp and you have a good signal and then you pull the ground, you'll notice that it will actually continue for a minute or so. Often, not every time, but often it'll continue without noticing the ground has been pulled, and then it fails after a while. I think that the smoothing window for implementing the math on updating the signal, I believe it actually uses a virtual ground against that math. And so that's why the raw signal can start to fail, and it can take a few seconds for the eager signal to drop away, like a while actually. Hey Fred, I haven't done the first one yet. More challenging due to age this year. Oh, for the marathon. Wow, first marathon at 59. That is a pretty crazy goal. Good for you, man. That's awesome. You should talk to John at Peak Brain. He's a runner. Talk him into training for that with you or something. Elliot, left brain, right brain differential in that arrow test. Yeah, check out Dr. Zeidel's lateralized attention network test, the LANT. You can also read my dissertation because, as you may remember, I did left hemisphere training and right hemisphere training separately, or placebo. And then I used the lateralized attention network test to look at attention changes within each hemisphere after neurofeedback. So mostly I focus on talking about how I could find the brain was reacting to neurofeedback happening, that loop, that event-related spectral perturbation you'll find in the rewarded frequency. That's there when you're rewarding something and not there when it's sham. But I also did attention testing, and you can see an effect on lateralized attention as you go through a week of neurofeedback, your very first week. It's not dramatic effects, but it is there. Oh, VJ, you're welcome, of course. Elliot's asking, would there be value in combining the Stroop-like tests and neurofeedback? Yeah, I mean, you can use a Stroop as an evaluator of executive conflict, Elliot. But, we also use the IVA at Peak Brain, which is like a classic go, no go. And the prudence aspects of the IVA, which is not clicking by mistake when the 2 pops up, or what happens after you are challenged in that way. That's prudence or carefulness. That's the executive conflict, essentially. So we're getting a good measure of it in most CPTs. The Stroop will get it, but it might be a little narrow and just get that. Also, the Stroop's interesting because for years, the idea was that the Stroop, so for folks that don't know, the Stroop effect is, or the Stroop test, is something that you use to measure, again, executive conflict, or the need to resolve from 2 competing things. You step out into a crosswalk because there's a walk sign, and at the same time, a car comes screeching around the corner. You have to decide what to do. That's executive conflict. And the LANT and the ANT I described earlier, responding to the direction of the middle hour versus the directions of the hours on the side, it's executive conflict. And what Elliot's also describing is a classic way of measuring executive conflict, which is a word pops up on the screen, and the word is printed in a certain color ink, and the text of the word is also a color name, but they don't match. And the requirement of the test is to say the color of the ink, not the color it's printed out in the word. So the word blue is printed in, yellow, for instance, text. And so that's the Stroop effect, or the Stroop test. And when there's congruency, when a blue word is printed in blue text, it's much, much faster and more accurate than when you have the word orange, printed in green or something. Much, much faster. And that's the very, very classic Stroop effect. And it's considered, again, executive conflict. It's also considered, of course, a language-based test because you're creating a language process. And understanding a word, reading a simple word, is considered to be an involuntary process if you can read. And it's also considered to be a process that happens incredibly early in the executive function landscape, meaning almost precognitive or pre-aware. The word emerges into your mind almost. You see something, you don't stop and read it, you have already read it. But there was a really interesting study done by a hypnotist. So there was a stage magician who went and got his PhD just before me in some of the same labs I worked with at UCLA, a guy named Amir Raz, R-A-Z, Raz. So you can look up Dr. Raz's research. But before he went to UCLA to get his PhD in, I think, cognitive neuroscience like me, he was a stage magician and hypnotist. And so he was interested while at UCLA in some of the brain-based impacts of hypnotism. And so he did a Stroop test, and he hypnotized people into thinking that the language that the words were printed in was Japanese. And none of them spoke Japanese or read it. None of them. And what he found was the Stroop effect was abolished if somebody believed through hypnosis that what they were looking at was not that word, which raises all kinds of questions like good science does, because, well, is reading not that sort of pre-aware? Or can hypnosis, which is considered a cognitive phenomena, act in pre-aware time courses, less than 50 milliseconds? So really interesting effect there, that you can abolish some aspects of cognitive or executive conflict through hypnosis. And especially in this case, the Stroop effect. So Dr. Amir Raz, check him out. Let's see. VJ's asking, attention improvement and flow state just continue to deepen if you focus on either. Yeah, there really is no upper limit. Sorry, VJ, I kind of jumped over your question. There really is no upper limit. I mean, what I would say is the worse things are, the faster they change, and the more deficits there are, usually up to a limit, up to a certain level. You can make huge changes and keep making them. And often people who are new to neurofeedback want to know, what can you do? How much can you do? And if I'm looking at a performance test, like an ADHD test, the IVA, the LANT, one of those types of things, and I have a sense of the metrics, population metrics, and your executive function is multiple standard deviations off the mean, well, then I know you're going to make multiple standard deviations of change pretty quickly. So I would usually early on in the process of neurofeedback assume somebody is changing executive function resources. And that includes things like speed of processing, and all the ADHD type phenomena, sustained attention, impulsivity, really changing at the rate of about a standard deviation for the gross resources, and half a standard deviation for the speed, which is a foundational resource. When I say gross resource, I mean cognitive things you're trying to do, like vigilance and carefulness and that kind of stuff. Those things change at about a standard deviation every other month, every 25 sessions of neurofeedback. And things like speed of processing changed about half a standard deviation against the average population every other month. Look at my little blue a line of a little ascending ramp. Looks very much like the thumbnail that I created for this video. I didn't plan on that. It's just happening. So let's see here. So there really is kind of no upper limit in my experience. And what I would say is that you end up thinking about not just one resource. Let me quit eager, take these wires off. That's 15 minutes. You end up thinking about not just one resource. I mean, peak performance, I've talked a lot about in other videos about the 3 legs of the stool: sleep, stress, and attention. And how if you don't have one of those 3 things managed, you're really undershooting in terms of what you can do. And you're probably not going to be a high performer, and you may suffer. And so get the 3 legs of the stool: the sleep, the stress, and the executive function, the attention. Get them in range, get them under your control, and make sure they're balancing each other. And those also support other resources and higher level resources like mood and motivation. There's some bound into the lower level things of executive function, stress, and sleep. There's some bottlenecks there. So you have to kind of have them all sorted out in terms of the basics. You got to sleep well. You got to have your executive function sorted. You got to have your anxiety and stress response manageable. But beyond that, sorry, I'm looking down because I'm cleaning off the paste. If you let your paste dry on the wires, you will destroy, or at least make your wires look really nasty. They'll often still work, but they'll look really cruddy as they tarnish with silver. But they are polished out now. So when thinking about upper limits, when thinking about being a peak performer, you got to start in the same place as all of us, which is, well, where are the bottlenecks and what's in the way, and what does success look like? Put these wires aside. There we go. And once you know what success looks like for you, maybe that is, high athletic output or breaking through records after records, or maybe it is competitive athletic output and nailing the big match, the big game, etc. Or maybe it is business or creative performance where you have to both manage that output while managing the reality of your job moment to moment, the sort of mundane. Or maybe it's some combination where what you really have to do is kind of move back and forth. I would say for task-based or elite high performers in like a sport or other particular things that are very narrow, you can almost define your things you're chasing based on the measurement of that sport, let's say. But for many people, the peak performance they're seeking is not just in that $1 million sport. There's not very many people getting paid to do that one thing. The peak performance they're seeing is actually across all domains of life. And so we end up thinking about the stability of those resources I first mentioned, but then we end up thinking about how we use them throughout the day. Are they able to flex with resilience and come back upright and remain powerful after a stressor, after being used, after being loaded up? What happens then? And are they able to be strong enough to handle the demand as you do things to not feel like you're overextended? So the resources need to not just be there and be balanced, but when thinking about peak performance, you need to have resilience of them. You need to have strength of them, in them, and you need to have control over them. You need to be able to control your executive function, your stress, your speed of processing, your sleep resources fairly well. And I don't just mean like get enough sleep and go work out at the gym and meditate. I mean that if your sleep gets thrown off, you need to know how to pull it back quickly. If you are an athlete or a high performer, am I in recovery mode? Am I in pre-game mode? Am I in post-game mode, etc.? And you can really do a lot here. Oh, looks like my OBS studio just disconnected briefly. What I was saying is, if you're a high performer, mostly we're not thinking about being high performers at a super, super high, narrow level like an athlete. We're thinking about it broadly. And that ends up being about the resilience of the resources, the strength to control them, and the degree of control we have over them. And so you can identify for yourself if there's something there that isn't what you need it to be, find that thing and get it to be more stable against the other resources. But again, first we have foundational things, the 3 legs of the stool: sleep, stress, and attention. Then we have higher level things like motivation and drive and mood and our self perspective. So these are all pretty complicated things. What does peak performance look like for you? For many of us, it is just performing without a lot of bottlenecks and performing roughly the same at the end of a long, busy day as you do early on when you're fresh first thing in the morning. Just start there. If you're not trying to break world records or Olympic records, you're not trying to, grind through and squeeze the juice out of life, you're just trying to perform better, then look at the resilience aspects first. Are you noticing failovers midday of energy? Are you noticing the impacts of choices you made yesterday on today's energy? Start there. And then if resources don't feel more strong enough, work on them there. And then you can work on the fine grade control as you work on the speed as well. So that really is the bulk of peak performers. But I got to say that I do a lot of different work for my peak performers that are like elite athletes compared to the ones that are, elite executives, perhaps. I have a couple of very elite athletes who work on professional sports teams, hockey, football, etc. And we change what we're doing when they're in preseason, when they're leading up to games, and when they're post-gaming. And I really bring things in like a recuperative way, like more alpha thetas, more photobiomodulation, more things focused on sleep depth after the meets. And before the meets, we're looking at things that bring up reaction time, bring up sustained attention, bring up impulsivity often. So you can do really standard protocols, but tailoring them to the person's goals really helps a lot. And then I will say that the peak performers end up with neurofeedback becoming these people for whom there might not be an upper limit. Vijay, you asked this earlier, but once people sort out all the big bottlenecks, then what, right? So I would suggest, and you might have something to say on this, but I would suggest that people can keep making change with the support of neurofeedback in a way they didn't expect, and it keeps happening, and they keep finding themselves potentially blowing past personal transformation goals they had at one point. So, feel free to tell me if you think that I'm accurate on that. I'm kind of being tongue in cheek here because I know you're going to say yes. Let me stop and answer more questions. VJ saying improvements in flow continue to deepen. Murray, hey Murray, can substantial neurogenesis or neural migration of new neurons occur in the neocortex? Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Or is it largely a myth outside of hippocampus? No, it's happening all the time. And thoughts on the importance of DHA. So neurogenesis, neuroplasticity, you're making new cells lifelong. Even at age 70 or something, you're still making 700 new neurons a day, roughly. It takes about 5 weeks for neurons to go from neural progenitor cells into neurons or into glial cells, whatever they need to be. It takes about 5 weeks, and it's a whole process of them migrating to the place they need to be used. And along the way, they turn into the cells they're going to become. And those cells have to create neural trophic factors or BDNF connections with other cells. Otherwise, they don't make it and they are resorbed. And something approaching half of the cells we make never make it to where they're going and are taken back up as raw material. So not only are we always making new cells, they're always migrating and growing, but we have excess capacity because half of them don't get used, not because they just fail, but because they're not incorporated into networks. They're not given information processing to do. So they just got to get resorbed. So yeah, you're always making cells and you have more upper limit to do more with them. DHA, I think it's really important. I'm very excited about a new development in the landscape around DHA. There's a compound called LPC-DHA, also LPC-EPA, and that's lysophosphatidyl-choline. So it's that phosphatidylcholine molecule bound to EPA and DHA. And because of that, the penetrance into the brain and the eyes is really, really high. It slides right past the blood-brain barrier and creates a much higher concentration of omega-3 fatty acids in the brain and eye tissue. And the early research is suggesting really dramatic anti-injury, injury recovery, and anti-aging effects coming from these DHA compounds. And the research has been out for several years. They finally have hit the shelves in manufacturing, bottles. The company that manufactures it and then relicenses it is called Lysoveta, Lysoveta. And there's at least 2 products that have just hit the shelves that contain Lysoveta, and they're expensive. So I might wait a minute to see what else hits the marketplace because it's like, $80, $100 a bottle for fatty acids. But I think if I had eye problems or significant cognitive problems with aging or the brain, I'd be getting them because I'm very, very excited. I think that the Lysoveta style, the LPC DHAs, are going to fulfill some of the promises we had about DHA when they first hit the marketplace. But with poor penetrance, with poor absorption through the blood-brain barrier, I think the promise of omega-3 fatty acids has been a little under-realized. All right, other questions here. Elliot has one referring to the Stroop or Lant as the game for NFB session. No, because you can't really assess and train at the same time. This is also why I don't use like a dual end back that has a or rather CPT that has a back component, like an ABX or something, where you have to reply to the stimulus only if it's followed by or preceded by a certain stimulus, because you're introducing complex measurement into something that you're trying to get a single assessment out of. If I wanted to do an assessment, also the LANT and even the Stroop, when we're looking at behavioral phenomena like that, to get a clean signal in your data, you need to average many, many trials. And the same is true, of course, for EEG or ERP. So I would assume you need hundreds of trials to properly assess what's happening. And I don't think we'd be able to look at the real-time changes of the ERP in a way that was meaningful against the variability across time of things like the Stroop and the Lant. So I'm not sure. It's an interesting idea, but I think it's like a grad student's project that out of it comes basic brain science findings, but not necessarily a tool to use as neurofeedback software, basically, is my thought. Let's see. VJ is saying, so peak performance takes longer to improve versus fixing deficits. Yeah. As you get those deficits out of the way, people just keep getting better. What you'll also see is that some people perform at a very high level. They keep doing neurofeedback, and they have these discontinuous changes. Every few months, they have breakthroughs of physical fitness or meditation ability or emotional health or awareness. So there's these discontinuous changes sometimes that sort of happen as you continue to do neurofeedback. Elliot's talking about Dr. Raz. Hypnotists make people forget numbers, but the notion of where in the cognitive processing sequence language happens is a fascinating twist. Yeah, he shouldn't be able to abolish the Stroop effect because it's precognitive, where language is, essentially, or the initial aspects of language. Apparently not. Oh, Elliot, as asking, he'd say like a LANT, L-A-N-T variant with animation, lateral moving graphics to left and right of a lateral. Yeah. So like movement is distracted. The problem with that is if you go more than about 1 degree off of midline, 2 degrees off of midline, you're actually using more than one neuron to get into the tissue. And so you're introducing secondary processing. If you keep things at arm's length, you basically put your thumbs side by side, and that is sort of like a 1 degree. And you can get 2 degrees of spread before you're actually recruiting a whole nother set of tissue to start doing some of the visual and sensory integration processing. So the tactistoscope wouldn't allow movement and wouldn't allow things to be further moved out into the visual field before you'd be really getting into a different type of test that would either draw saccades, draw attention, and break the tactistoscope, the fixed presentation. Part of the reason the LANT works so well is if you're staring at a crosshair in the middle of the screen and you flash something very quickly into the left visual field, if you don't move your eyes, then that left side of each eye, the right side of each eye, the left visual field goes to the right side of either eye. That ends up combining and going back to the right section of the brain. And so if you flash something very, very quickly on either side, you end up with the information converging only in one hemisphere. And then the LANT has the other trick of blocked trials where for one block at a time, you respond only with one hand. So if you're flashing things into one hemisphere and you're responding with the hand from that hemisphere, then you're doing attention testing within one hemisphere. But if you're flashing all the information in one hemisphere and then requiring response from the other hemisphere's hand, then you're requiring interhemispheric transfer. So this is how the LANT can actually do within hemisphere versus combined hemisphere information testing. And it's a very, very strong effect. I also, Dr. Zeidel was Roger Sperry's lab assistant, a grad student at Caltech, and he worked on a lot of the early split brain subjects. This is how he got this idea about how attention works individually. And then I worked with her on, in my early grad school career at UCLA, driving around the western half of the US, finding all of the really old split brain subjects that had first had the research done on them 30, 40, 50 years earlier, and retesting them all with lateralized attention testing, 64 channel caps, and validating. You can test attention in each hemisphere pretty well if there's no corpus callosum. And these early patients had complete or total comma-cherotomies, corpus callosum being completely cut. Nowadays, they do still cut the corpus callosum sometimes for seizures, but usually just the fibers that will stop the particular seizure from bouncing back and forth, not the whole thing. But we had this great population of people who had complete and total separation. There's very little experience from their point of view about what's happening unless you do very artificial things to kind of tease apart the hemispheres are separated, because there's other parts of the brain that are still connected. And so late in the like the vision's still connected. So late in the process of experience, the two hemispheres come together with or without a corpus callosum. And so the experience of attention is pretty similar without even a midline connection between the two cortices. So Dr. Zeidel found that this phenomena was very strong in a split brain population. And then part of what I worked on was validating the LANT in typical people, and very, very similar results. There's complete separable executive function systems within each hemisphere. And my perspective on it is these constructs of executive conflict, spatial orienting, and alerting, which has a temporal and a spatial component to it. And these exist separately in each hemisphere. And then very, very, very late, at the last moment of possible perception, they're combined. And then they're supervised by the tissue on the right-hand side under C4 that really sort of connects the frontal areas to the posterior areas and is doing a sort of management thing. And then this is how lateralized attention kind of works all at once, even though, individually we have almost completely separate executive function systems operating and chugging along with each hemisphere. VJ is still shocked at how he blew past all his meditation goals. Yes, and continue to progress. Yeah, so VJ is an expert neurofeedbacker and meditator, and he's more expert at training his brain and meditating now. Yes, you can definitely blow past peak performance goals. I mean, I would argue that many of us who have peak performance goals, especially coming into peak brain, they often don't think about the fact that some of the things that are limiting peak performance are the same things as what other people call suffering. Trauma or fatigue or stress or whatever. And for some of us, it's diagnosed and given a name, and it's strong and it's specific. And for other people, it's a resource that just needs to be worked on. And the high performers with all the skills and all the money and all the high-powered jobs and all the athletic contracts don't have brains that are that different than ours, but they tend to plan better. They tend to architect support better. They tend to have a certain amount of drive and agency and sticking to it process that maybe not everyone does. So I don't think that it's a specific kind of brain. And I do think you can teach yourself, you can practice becoming a peak performer. And you will likely not have anything in the way if those basic resources of speed of processing, stress, sleep, and attention, if those things are intact, then you probably can take the system and tune it up into a really rarefied set of performance attributes. So on that inspiring note here, okay, on that last note, we'll see if there's any more questions here. Doesn't look like there are. I see my OBS just briefly disconnected again. I hope it wasn't too disconcerting. All right, guys, so I think that'll be it for the night. Lay down any more questions you have before we break, and I'll try to answer them. I think maybe next week I'll talk about oxygen or air, and I'll cover a few topics, maybe about breath work or breathing practices, and I'll also talk about hyperbaric medicine and how to use that in a biohacking context next week. So if you guys want to, I'll probably put that up in the middle of the week. You can look for it and subscribe for notifications. Before you leave tonight, if you could, go find a video to make a comment on, or you could like and subscribe a bunch of stuff, and YouTube algorithm will notice that and share all the videos out. So if you've gotten something out of this, please do me a favor and boost it, share it with a friend, come back and watch some things if you wish. And otherwise, take good care of those brains, and let me know if I can support you with specific topics. If you need a brain map and need to understand your own brain, come see one of our peak brains, either in a physical office or we can do a lot of that work virtually. So thanks to everyone that showed up tonight, rousing the discussion. Lots of folks showing up in real time. I really appreciate it. But even if you're here later, I appreciate you too. So guys, take good care of those brains, and I'll talk to you soon.